Hello, everyone. We're done. Las Vegas has come to a wrap here, and this is kind of the post production of everything that happened at Las Vegas and more. So we are focusing in on the event and that I just got back from in Las Vegas, and then what's coming up in the future here in Seattle. So, how everything we saw from Steel Song to Ruby Sapphire, and of course the Winter's Green Steel, or Emerald Steel, I should say, and more kind of plays into the future events when it comes to Continentals and then eventually Worlds. But let's dive right in here. Welcome back again. We're going to go into the deck I played at the DLC in Las Vegas, and I think many of you may know what it would probably be. It will be Steel Song. Shocking. I had to put Locked on this because I had many variations of the deck that I had built in Dreamborn and wanted to help differentiate by putting something I wouldn't normally put on a deck list, which is Locked. So, very similar to a lot of the lists I had been experimenting with, kind of hybrids between the versions at the Charlie's Collectibles 10K and the 2K for Star City Games, kind of borrowing lessons from both, and unfortunately having to consider part of the fact that some people may know the deck list I'm going to play. That is a drawback. I think that every one of my opponents, or at least I would say 8 out of 9 of my opponents, knew the archetype I was probably playing before the game started, which did give me a little bit of disadvantage. Not to say that's what caused me to lose or anything like that, or blaming that, but it does probably play a part into some of how the early bulk decisions on their side played out. So let's dive right in. There was a bit of a kind of tension point of how to configure certain numbers of cards in the deck. The key ones I'd probably want to highlight would be Piglet, Ursula, Storm Mage on, Tinkerbell, Grab Your Sword, and Cinderella, Stout-Hearted, and Naveen, of course, Prince Naveen being 4 of. The initial take of Prince Naveen, I think, was warranted. I think 4 of it is correct, despite having only so many songs that really could play well with it. I think it's just a card that is imperative to win mirror matches. It helps you catch back up on the board. It's good to be a proactive threat, so you don't have to just play Homeworld and have to pass back, giving them the first kind of bit of initiative there. But what we do have here is kind of, again, a mix of the two decks there. There is a 1 copy of Grab Your Sword, and it is over the 4th copy of Let the Storm Rage On. That was a conscious decision to take 1 Storm out and put 1 Grab Your Sword in, mainly because I want people to have to play around the card more so than actually wanted the card in my deck. I think that a big factor in this type of tournament is, again, with the deck I've been playing being relatively known, I tried 2 different versions. I tried versions with Grab Your Sword and one without. One of them had 2 Grab Your Swords, the other one had 0. So playing 1, if it came up, left them kind of guessing that there could be a second one there. While there will be plenty of situations where they cannot afford to play around it or aren't thinking too much into it to think they have to play around it to begin with, I do like having access to at least 1 in this specific situation. Going forward, I probably will remove the 1 copy of Grab Your Sword for a more kind of streamlined version of the deck. Consistency, there is something to be said about it. Let the Storm Rage On definitely plays itself into more consistent openings, making your Cinderellas and Ursulas even better in the early game, which I didn't really struggle too much with the early game. A lot of my losses there came much later in the game, and we'll get to that in just a little bit here. I did switch the numbers there between the Cinderella, Stout-Hearted, and Tinkerbell. I think with 3 Tinkerbells, I would want to play 2 Grab Your Swords. Again, I think they're specifically different versions of the deck, not one being correct and one being incorrect. 3 Tinkerbell and 2 Grab Your Swords is a kind of package deal there. You could say, why wouldn't you play 3 Grab Your Swords or 3 Tinkerbells? Well, Ariel gives you a little bit of room to cheat on that, where being able to look at 4 more cards to a specific type of card like a song gives you a little bit more leniency to play less copies. So that's why I think that the package was 3 Tinkerbell and 2 Grab Your Swords instead of just 3 and 3. But needless to say, I don't think it'll make the cut going forward, but we have a lot of kind of time before the next DLC, which I unfortunately won't be able to attend. I had a prior obligation that weekend since the beginning of the year before the dates were even announced, so I do have a ticket, but I'm looking to get rid of it, so I know someone who's going to take that from me. Or if I can just put it back into the pool, also cool too. But yeah, I did like it for this tournament, and specifically when these type of events are considered and you plan on doing well, or you hope that you do well, there is a little bit to say about the Day 2 play. Day 2 of a Disney Lorcana challenge is open Decklist. The knowledge I'd give my opponent by having them know I don't have any way to sweep their board with 1 card is a pretty big downside, I think. I think it does make some sense to then at some point play 1 copy of Grab Your Swords, even though in most formats where Decklist won't be public or the top 8 doesn't have that type of feature there for it, or a smaller local event, I probably wouldn't play Grab Your Sword. But in some situations where you get to kind of play that mind game of if you have it or not up until a certain point, it may be good to have one. But it does come at the expense of some other cards. One of the biggest things you've seen here from the different that I haven't played before in this deck is World's Greatest Criminal Mind. I was never a big fan of it, and I still am not too big of a fan of it after the event. It did some things that were okay, but mostly it just helped take out cards like Sisu and Maui. It really never hit Automato, even though I played against Ruby at Sapphire a bunch. That was kind of the dream situation, but you kind of more so lose or are in bad shape when they play the Ruby cards rather than the Sapphire ones. So while it can do great things and it is kind of an emergency button against that type of deck, it's really hard to have line up correctly. And I do think that it may be potentially correct to play Bare Necessities. And I'll get into, I think, why I actually think that Bare Necessities may be better, more specifically in just a little bit here. So it wasn't a good experiment. Again, it may be right to have one copy in a deck in a tournament where you have an open deck list late in the tournament. But for right now, I think that I'd go back to favoring Bare Necessities. Bare Necessities has a unique kind of nuance to it being good in the mirror match. While World's Greatest can take out, the card it's right next to, Cinderella Stout Hearted, and that is very important in the mirror match. I think more often than not, the game's going to come down to early lore aggression and the game getting locked out by Pete more so than Cinderella. So I think my assessment of how that card played out always may have been a little bit mistaken. It did punish me in one of my first Steel Song matches. I had World's Greatest and I was playing against Steel Song and really wanted to just be able to play a song to turn my Cinderella on, and the only target for World's Greatest would have been my own Cinderella. So I did get a little bit punished in that sense, but it definitely killed a lot of big characters along the way. Another card and kind of change there, going down to 2 Piglets. I did think that there was enough in the deck to pressure and kind of answer a lot of Ruby Sapphire's cards to only have to play 2 Piglets. You can make the argument in that sense to then remove Piglet altogether and just play 4 Smees and 3 Ursulas. That's also a legitimate way to approach the matchup, to where Smee is less vulnerable to cards like Sisu or the small or big. And Brawl, so having a character that's more sturdy and also has the upside of being able to combine with Rapunzel may be just a better option. Having the 2 in tandem is always nice, and Piglet being a 3 lore quester is certainly relevant. It came up in one of my last games that kind of knocked me out of the tournament, where I had a Piglet in play, I think 7 or 8 ink in play, and I whole new worlded and needed to find 2 characters, and I missed, and that was kind of the end of my tournament. A little unfortunate, but it happens. But yeah, I do like the rest of the list. I think the numbers are solid in it. I still really do like Lantern. A couple of people I do practice with on occasion who are close to me and have been working together in multiple card games for many years, were playing flutes in that spot. And I can certainly understand the desire to play flutes to help shore up the Ruby Sapphire matchup. I do believe that they do get a lot of value in their deck by also kind of naturally including Hideaway at this point. I think it's pretty crucial for the mirror matches, so I'm not certain how much of a game changer it would be if there was flutes over Lanterns, because I do see them inking the Hideaway quite often, where it doesn't do anything against Lantern. If you're playing Ruby Sapphire, please never hide away a Lantern. It does not make any sense. It is wasting a card on your side. It's better off as actually doing anything else, probably being a bluff card in your hand, or being an ink to play later, or potentially off of a quill, or anything really. So don't hide away Lantern. I've seen that happen a couple times at the event. Please don't. Just for your own sake there. But no, I do think that the kind of difference there may be a bit null, but one of the important things that they did use in the event was playing 4 copies of Ursula and 4 copies of Smee, which is why I brought this up. They have any Piglets to kind of avoid the whole Brawl/Sisu dilemma there, but did reasonably well, had some issues, and this deck does lend itself to kind of losing to itself more often than not, which is why I'm assuming at this point it does thrive under best of 3. I did have a good write-up about the exact details of what I think of the events going forward. I've played in 4 challenges now and a lot of other best of 2 events. Prior to the removal of Pixelborn, there was a lot of online events I played in. I think my opinion's pretty well known and also articulated more so in that article up. It is free on my Patreon. You should go look at that. It's patreon.com/bdcandy07. Same thing you see on the top left of the screen. That's what it's at. Go give it a read. It's free there. Don't have to pay for anything to review that, and kind of goes over some tournament details as well as to what to do and how we can improve as a community as a whole. But moving right along, I'm going to bring up some of the records there, my record at the tournament here on the right. And as you can see, it did not start off well. I started off losing 0-2 to Ruby Sapphire, and there was a whole lot of decisions that went into it. Now, with this type of deck, because it is so flexible, you go down a ton of decision trees. You really go through hundreds, throughout the game, there's a bunch of different paths you can take. And I feel like in my first round, I took every wrong door, essentially leading to the next. And it wasn't because I guessed incorrectly. It just didn't work out in my favor. So I guess wrong is a bad way to put it. But just didn't play to my strengths in that matchup. It definitely kind of bit me at the decisions I made. They had the right things to punish me. And they played well, reasonably well. They did a lot of, things that were very good against me. And we had close games, I think both games, even the ones, I O2'd. But it happens. Second round in the mirror match, played against someone I recognized, I think Smashing Patty on Pixelborn there. We had some good games, kind of had a big back and forth for a bit. And that's, I think, the game where my World's Greatest was stranded in hand, when I really wanted any song to turn Cinderella into attack that may have lost me the game. If it was Bare Necessities, I might have been able to pull it off, but it happens. And round 3, Amber Amethyst, so yellow, purple, aggro. Kind of the matchup that you dreamed up against playing against. They had some really good openings. They played really well, played to their outs, but it just wasn't in the cards. And I did draw the one Grab Your Swords that really kind of threw them for a loop. Round 4, I split again against a Steel Song. I believe her name was Corinne. I don't apologize if I got that wrong, but I do remember your name. Very lovely opponent, very fun to play against. Definitely had some awkward games there. I think in game 1 they had I was pretty far ahead, a very sweeping kind of board advantage with a bunch of three power 3 health characters. I think I had 2 Petes, 2 Navines, and Cinderella Stoutheart didn't play, and then I got double Grab Your Sword out of nowhere, where I was like, oh, well, that was just bad. And in game 2, they kind of had the inverse. They had the double Grab Your Sword, but they also had 3 copies of Hole in the World in their hand and no 5th ink for a bit, so it was a little unfortunate. Following that up, Blue Steel, Sapphire Steel. That matchup, they also had a pretty awkward game 2 hand. I think game 1 I was pretty aggressive out of the gates and kind of just locked it up relatively quickly. In game 2, I believe they even showed some of their hand as double Hole in the World to start, which wasn't a death sentence. They had Tipo and Quill, but it just really didn't come together for them and kind of lost into their own sense there. But I do think that the Blue Steel matchup for this deck is a lot better than it used to be. Blue Steel does have a difficult time a lot of times dealing with Pete, so I've seen a lot of people go back to cards like Hades in the deck and try to play more to the board. But following that up, I played against Blurple, Sapphire Amethyst. Some insane games back and forth. I even had to give them a full, essentially, Whole New World turn. I played Whole New World into their Mufasa, which was about to ready, and they got to do a bunch of things, including playing an Elsa and a Hades, but then my turn was even more kind of powerful on the swing back there with, I think, strengthening the Raging Fire 2 to 3 times in the single turn, because I knew there was only a few cards of my deck left, and I hadn't seen any copies of them, so I was able to deal it for 9 and then 8, and just it was a big mess, but it was close. Round 7, Ruby Sapphire, kind of the death row at the end there of Ruby Sapphire. This is kind of where the tournament ended. From this position, I needed to 6-0 to get into the second day, and losing the first game there, while it did mean that essentially my game 2, after I'd lost game 1, was playing to knock them out. If I'd still won out from that point, essentially that game 2, and then for the next, I still would have got to let it go. So my incentive was there to keep playing, which is unfortunate because I would like to see my opponent, who was very kind and very well-mannered throughout the game. I would love to have seen them day 2, but just how the tournament structure is, I'm still incentivized to play out for some prizing. So awkward, but happens. But in that matchup specifically, yeah, I think there was a sequence there where they needed to, from empty hand, go runner, and that was the game where I Whole New Worlded on the last turn with a Piglet in play at 17, no other characters, 6 ink or 7 ink, and I needed to find 2 characters to deploy, and I did not, and I lost because of that. But it happens, and we can really just shrug off variance in a lot of kind of ways, because the more you get to play, the less likely that's to affect or kind of be a reflection of how good you are. Your kind of skill will usually shine through. Variance plays a role only so much. But the next match I had a fun time kind of giving them a little bit of a scare. My strong opinion is that at that point I had lost game 1. I had wrote a secret note underneath my life pad, which I told them I'd tell them about later, which they were a little confused by because I was down a game, and you really can't take notes in a game, so why is he writing something? So we had played a game out. They were actually playing 64 cards, and that's relevant because the game ended on turn 4 of extra turns with them having 0 cards in deck, but they won with a second diamond hand on their 1 remaining character in their deck with exact lore. But the secret message I wrote, which was kind of done after I lost game 1, which was, I'm going to concede, because I just wanted to play it out just for fun, and I wanted to see them play at their best, and they really did play very well. We had a really good back and forth. The game was a lot of decisions, and at that point in time, it's better for me to not even try to knock someone out, because that doesn't make any sense. I want to see them get something at least. So even though we did end up playing and they did end up winning, I'm still going to concede the match beforehand. I have the little notepad over there with that words. It's kind of fun to just do, and they were a good sport about it. They were just wanting to play, and they enjoyed the game, so it all worked out. And in the last round, I said against my opponent, who's also playing Ruby Sapphire, I had asked, because we ended up not playing the games, because we already had at least 30 points for the prize ticket wall, which is the highest you can get without getting to Let It Go, and there was no way we can get the points needed for Let It Go at that point. So we didn't even play. We just kind of sat there, left, and got some food. So that was the tournament. It was pretty, I would say, anticlimactic for the most part. There was a brief moment after round 6, leading up to that Death Row Ruby Sapphire, where I thought there would be a small chance. But after those top decks there to kind of knock me out, I was pretty sure that was just, it's not my weekend. And that's good to note. There are a lot of times where it's not going to be your weekend. No matter how good you are, you're going to have weekends where you falter. Things are just not going to work out. They're going to, your opponent's going to get lucky in situations. It happens for everyone, to everyone. It's not anything to be concerned with. It's not a reflection of how good or bad you are, but it is always good to note the lessons that can be learned from losing. That being said, some of the lessons I did learn from here kind of stretch in a broader sense of how to approach the game. The game has a lot of incentive for you to have a deck that is somewhat less flexible at times and more kind of matchup based as far as how well it can do. People playing Ruby Sapphire, and previously to this format, when I played a lot of Blue Steel, I was reflecting on the differences between Blue Steel and Amber Steel, and while I do really enjoy the flexibility of the cards I get to play in this deck, and it gives me a lot of options, and it plays to having potentially a larger decision tree to make the right choice and have more options to get to that correct choice, it does give you a lot of opportunities to make mistakes. And that's something I've always said about this deck. It is a deck that is highly complicated, and one mistake probably will lose you the game. That's happened to me. And again, it's not always obviously a mistake. The round when I played, I made a lot of judgment calls, including inking a turn when Piglet going first, playing a Cinderella. Happened to be blue-red, and that was kind of the end of it for me. It was really poor to having inked the Piglet, even though that's what my hand told me to do generically on the play. The one matchup I didn't want to play against, which ended up being, I think, 23% of the field, was Ruby Sapphire. Steel Song was about 20. Ruby Amethyst, which I didn't play against at all, was, I think, 16%. So those are the top 3 decks. And I do believe that Ruby Amethyst will always be overrepresented at challenges, or that type of deck, because it is a safe choice that people play. It's a comfort deck. It's a deck that can win any given matchup depending. And it's a cheap deck. People should factor into the cost into consideration when they think about what people at large are going to play. It's a large event. Not everyone has all the cards, and while they do make the effort to go to Las Vegas, imagine someone who is relatively new to the game just going because it's fun, their friends are going, and they're going to go to Las Vegas anyway, so who cares if they win? They're playing a deck that's pretty cheap. They don't want to spend a lot of money. So that's, I think, going to be reflective of every event we see, where the cheaper deck will be a little bit more represented than it is in smaller, more localized tournaments, which we've seen on Ink decks. Kind of the metagame breakdown that Lorcana Villain did. It did not show as much of a good kind of conversion ratio for top cuts for Ruby Amethyst, but we saw more of it here. My point being, circling back around here, going back to the style of decks, while it does give me a lot of play and a lot of options, again, there are a lot of room to make mistakes, and the power level of cards really needs to snowball. But if the ball really never gets going, it's really hard to kind of pick it up late in the game and throw it at your opponent. So I'm not certain that Steel Song is always going to be the best deck for these type of events, especially in best of 2. It does, again, have some fail rate sometimes where you draw the wrong half of your deck, too many uninkable cards, or less so that one uninkable, because you should be mulliganing for a more consistent opening. But games where you don't draw Whole New World, games where you draw too many of them, they're all extra variables, which sometimes is a bit of a crux for a deck like this. And you're not doing the most powerful things in the game, like casting Be Prepared or Medusas and things like that, Tamatoa, to really get ahead. You're relying on much more of a continuous game plan that can't really afford to falter too many times. And again, this doesn't mean I'm off the deck entirely, but for best of 2, it may not be the best choice. If you were to continue playing this type of deck in best of 2, which certainly we'll see plenty of people do, it is a very powerful deck. Prince Naveen's power level cannot be understated. It is an incredible card, and it's, again, I think probably the best card in the set. It does a ton of work in every single matchup. It's why I played 4 instead of 3. I kind of wavered on that for a moment just to see how it felt, but I missed the card, and I certainly always wanted it in my hands, and especially going second, which in challenges, you do have to win going second. I always wanted it to help me catch me back up against opponents who are going first. But when you play a best of 2, I think taking a more aggressive game plan or line to play with this deck could be correct. And while I do really not like the idea of not playing Lantern, I could see removing Lantern for more aggressive characters. You'll clog up your curve a lot by doing so, if you include cards like Lawrence, but again, those are cards that may be kind of necessary in some sense. Another card I was experimenting with was Beast Hardheaded, the 5-cost set 1 destroying item beast, over the card like Benja. Now, the reason for something like that in a version with Lantern, more likely than not, is one of the biggest qualms I have with Benja is that while you are removing an ice block for to be able to shrink one of your characters like Prince Naveen against a big Sisu that will probably wipe your board otherwise, Benja itself does not survive the Sisu. So are you really progressing your game plan as much as playing another character that would have kind of worked out? The instance where that's kind of relevant would be in a case where they're playing a second copy of Big Sisu, but in most of those games where that's happening, it's going to be a little bit too late anyway. So there's experimentation to be done still within the archetype, whether you play Beast Hard-Headed, Benja, if you really want to kill items. Again, Ice Block's one of the biggest cards that you kind of have a problem with. A lot of your characters are naturally out of Sisu range here, but Ice Block changes the equation quite a bit. And I don't think cards like Find Them Platinum really make sense, even if you're not playing Lantern, because they have the ability to recur them. And Find Them Platinum isn't really anything that pressures your opponent. It just helps answer some boards, and it's very situational in my opinion. But it will definitely have, be in some deck lists. You'll find success playing against it. It'll definitely win you some games, but not my overall approach to how this deck should be played or how it should really look. But that's been really the breakdown of the tournament. It was a lot of fun. I had, a great time spending it with my wife there. It was her birthday. Happy birthday. Again, a little belated, but we celebrated it while we were there. And I met a ton of awesome people, some of you people who are watching the videos, some people who I saw on my Discord, and people I've coached before. I love meeting people. I say this in a most positive way. I was trying to leave the event at one point in time, and I think it took me about 30 minutes to get out the door because people kept stopping to talk to me. And you know what? A-okay with that. Love it. Love talking. If I have to go, I'll let you know. But it was a lot of fun getting to meet everyone and just kind of embrace the community. People are not always able to travel and go to all the events, so this was kind of their one chance to go to these events, and I applaud those who did well. Dan, awesome job winning the tournament. You did great. Definitely a very skilled player, one of the best minds in the game, and someone I look forward to playing against and maybe working with in one of the Continentals. We'll see. But until next time, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Hope this gave you some insight into the deck. I liked a lot of it here. I think there's a more aggressive approach that needs to be taken for best of 2, but we'll have to work on that again soon and kind of see where we're at from there. But until next time, thanks for watching.